Good evening and welcome to the March event of the Blake Society. And it's a great pleasure tonight to introduce a subject we've not touched on before, and that is the joys and challenges of translating Blake into other languages, and in particular, Blake's Jerusalem. To introduce tonight's event, I'm going to hand over to my fellow trustee, Sibylla.
Good evening. I'm delighted to welcome my colleague Elisa Vokovska, a widely published and esteemed Blake scholar and translator of Blake, as well as Camilla Oliveira, who is one of the rising new stars of the Blake universe. You may remember that Elisa Vokovska and Camilla Oliveira connected spontaneously at Blake's birthday party in November 2020. Intrigued by what had happened, I wrote to them and invited them to collaborate on an event, Blake's Jerusalem in translation, for the Blake Society. They said yes to the challenge, and they talked and they worked together across continents to create tonight's event. Their collaboration turned into an opportunity for cross-Atlantic mentoring. Thank you, Elisa, for your generosity and inspiration. Thank you, Camilla, for your enthusiasm.
I have enthusiasm too.
You do, lots of it. Elisa Vokovska is Associate Professor of Literature at SWPS University Social Sciences and Humanities in Warsaw. She's the author of But He Talked of the Temple of Man's Body, Blake's Revelations Unlocked from 2009, as well as two monographs on Wordsworth, The Presence of God in the Works of William Wordsworth and The Absent God in the Works of William Wordsworth, published in November 2020 by Routledge. Elisa contributed to the reception of William Blake in Europe, published by Bloomsbury Academic in 2019. Elisa's dream is to translate all of Blake's works into Polish. Earlier this year, she submitted a grant application to make this happen. Camilla Oliveira is a PhD student at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro and King's College London. Her PhD is on William Blake's reception in music. Blake's Jerusalem in translation consists of two presentations. Elisa Vokovska will go first and Camilla Oliveira second. Our speakers will talk for about 45 minutes. There will be a Q&A at the end. Please mute yourself. Please switch off your cameras. You are encouraged to put your questions and comments into the chat during the presentations, but we will not interrupt our speakers. The Q&A with our speakers comes at the end of tonight's event. Sit back and enjoy. The floor is yours.
All right, so I'll be starting again. I'll be sharing my screen with you.
Okay,
it's fine. So I'll be sharing my screen with you. Moments, forgive, just you'll not see the whole of the screen. I'll be zooming because I've got some notes on top, so that's why not the whole of it, but I'll be just referring you to particular, minute particulars on several plates, and later perhaps even switch off the presentation so that I can see more of you. All right, so I have got the opening plates, those opening plates of Jerusalem, placed here to, make the obvious statement that Jerusalem is a work of exquisite beauty. I'm zooming to show you my favorite minute particular, which is here with this moth, right? And this is visual beauty, and it's, of course, textual power and beauty. And I'm taking you to the third plate, zooming the first paragraph. And you know, it is already on opening, this work, even the frontispiece, but you know, here even more visible, that you immediately see a number of ways in which this work is a challenge for a translator. In that project Sibylla has described, you know, there is a plan that we will have Jerusalem published along with those illuminated plates. Yeah, so we thought, wow, yeah, we'll have the plates as the base for the translation. Yeah, but you know, you see immediately that this is not going to work because there are gaps. You must rely upon the prompts suggested by Blake editors. Okay, so this is one thing. Yeah, and there are other problems with translation, right? Seen in this manner, like bilingual parallel addition, right? And I'll talk about these problems willingly if you ask later. Okay, and one other reason why I'm drawing your attention to this opening plate is Blake's claim, which comes here, that Jerusalem is a consolidated work. Okay, you see it here. Consolidated. I'm going to refer to this claim several times, so I wanted you to see exactly where it comes from. Okay, also, the difficulty and challenge of Jerusalem as a text for translation is that it combines prose with, of course, rhymed poetry, as already in this opening plate and basically in those introductory passages, plates to particular chapters, and of course the majority is blank verse. And you know, Blake adds substantially to this challenge by claiming that, as you see here, it is the second longer paragraph on this opening plate, that every word and every letter is studied and put in its fit place. And you know, when a translator sees such a claim, confronts such a statement, she understands that every word and every letter of the translation will have to be similarly and just as carefully studied and put into its fit place. Okay, and you know, as has been described in this notice about today's event, these intimate aspects of the translator's job, so the dilemmas concerning what is the fit word and the fit letter and where is that fit placed. Yeah, so these challenges will be discussed a little later, particularly by Camilla. Whereas my job will be to approach the subject of Jerusalem in translation from a more general perspective, and I will focus on, in particular, on the paradox that in many countries and languages, this is not the case with Portuguese. It's definitely the case with Polish and a number of other languages. You know, this consolidated work of William Blake is the last prophetic book to be translated. And, you know, more often than not, it exists in translation only in fragments. And, you know, I'm basing this conclusion on the reception of William Blake in Europe. Yes, so that book Sibylla has just mentioned. With Sibylla as a co-editor together with Morton. And I'm also basing this conclusion on the history of Blake translations in Poland, where, for example, the Four Zoas, so the text which seems incomplete, was translated and, you know, translated as a whole and published 15 years ago, whereas Jerusalem, which is the work which is complete and which, you know, includes this promise of narrative continuity. I'm zooming here the top of plate 77. I give you the end of, yes, so it's the last of those introductory plates to the Christians. I give you the end of a golden string, only wind it into a ball. It will lead you in at heaven's gate, built in Jerusalem's wall. So this complete and consolidated work has been translated in Poland only in fragments. And when you reflect upon the logic of those fragments for translation, you know, if you prefer the logic pattern of elimination, it becomes clear at once that translators tend to omit the passages which are overtly and insistently British English in their reference. And the problem is that in the case of Jerusalem, skipping such passages means that you eliminate perhaps 70% of the text, 2/3, 3/4. I'd like to illustrate this point and on the way reflect on the specificity of Jerusalem as the text for translation. And I'm taking you now to, not this one, right, to the first plate of the poem proper. It begins with those fine lines defining the theme of Jerusalem, defining the theme of Jerusalem, of the sleep of Ulro, I'm pronouncing the Polish way, and of the passage through eternal death, and of the awakening to eternal life. This theme calls me in sleep nights after nights, and every morn awakes me at sunrise. Then I see the Savior over me, spreading his beams of love and dictating the words of this mild song. Awake, awake. Okay, passionate, intense, earnest words of exquisite power, which will probably sound phenomenally good when translated into any language. I'm just giving you this passage here in Polish. Zbudź się, zbudź, o śpiący tego lądu w cieniach. Wstań, rośnij. Ja jestem w Tobie, Ty we mnie. Wzajemnimy w boskiej miłości. It's privilege and honor and joy to translate such a text. Yeah. You move to the following plate. And the text is just as appealing and just as wide-ranging. Trembling, I sit day and night. Yeah, I'm here with this paragraph here. My friends are astonished at me. Yeah, day and night, with this fantastic echo of the opening claim that Jerusalem, the theme of Jerusalem, pulls Blake in sleep night after night. Yeah, my friends are astonished at me. Yeah, they forgive my wanderings. I rest not from my great task. Yeah? And this is followed by a description of that great task, intimately personal, including probably one of the most passionate prayers written in the English language. O Savior, here you are. O Savior, pour upon me thy spirit of meekness and love. Annihilate the selfhood in me. Be thou all my life. But, immediately after that, within this paragraph, at such an early stage, remember this is just plate 5. Already here, Blake moves smoothly from this description of his great task and from this intimate prayer to a pretty intimidating list of Albion's sons, Hound and Highland, Cobban and Quantock, Peachy, Brereton, Slight, etc. Right? So it's already here that they are introduced. A moment later, it is same plate. Just a couple of paragraphs later, he introduces a similarly intimidating list of the daughters of Albion, Gwendolen and Cowenna and Cordella and Ingoga, right? And let me mention that these characters appear in the Four Zoas just once, in a late edition tonight, the second, where they are introduced to be instantaneously abandoned, okay? They appear to disappear. Yeah, Jerusalem is clearly an attempt to work on those late editions, to develop, to consolidate, make stronger, make more coherent. Once introduced, these characters continue to be active participants of the myth. They enter into intimate and intricate relations with the sons of Albion, and in various configurations appear in perhaps half of the poetic plates of Jerusalem, yeah, which throws a light upon that earlier figure I gave you. Once you decide to omit such passages, you must eliminate the majority of the text because it's woven so tightly. Still dwelling on this image of the string and this string's structure, Blake creates intricate correspondences between the British and the biblical, and for instance, between those 12 sons of Albion and the 12 tribes of Israel. And of course, if you eliminate such characters, yeah, the English characters, all the British intertextualities must be eliminated alongside, because if you study Jerusalem carefully, it turns out that nearly all references to the Bible from the Old Testament to Revelation are one way or other intertwined with those British references. And to give you an extreme example, from a relatively early place, here am I. Okay, and I'd like to show you a passage and give you a small quotation, a small, a small translation passage, this same passage in translation, okay, to where am I? Okay, I'm here with the counties of Scotland. Yeah, so I hope you see, all right. And now to give you a little bit of the Polish text. All right. A 36 hrabstw Szkocji tak oto siedzieli. W bramie Rubena, Kinkard, read it, Hadtn, I'm going with the Polish version, right? I Forfar, Symeona, Ayr, Argyll, Banff, Lewiego, Edinburgh, Roxborough, Ross, Judy, Aberdeen, Berwick, etc. You know, these are overwhelming catalogs. Yeah, and there are more. For example, Blake introduces the 28 cathedral cities, right, who will also become active participants of his myth. And you know, when you look at this, right, it may seem easy to translate such a passage, yet there seems to be little work to do. But on the other hand, you know, it is frustrating to produce a translation which you can't read properly. Yeah, you know, if I were, to be honest, you know, I've never heard the majority of these proper names pronounced in Polish. Also, if you look closer at this catalog, there are abbreviations, okay, like this HAT. Right. There are also spelling mistakes, like Edinburgh here, or like Glasgow. And you know, the question is, should these features be preserved in translation? And you know, I'm sharing with you one of the million translatorial dilemmas posed by Jerusalem. In the original, to the native eye, these features produce the impression of a hurry, a very powerful impression, yeah? As if Blake were writing down in shorthand the text which is being dictated. But an average Polish eye will, you know, most likely not see those abbreviations and all that effect of hurry. Yeah, but see exclusively the spelling mistakes, my editorial spelling mistakes, or however that will be interpreted. Yeah, so a question, should they be preserved? Yeah, what is the fit word and the fit letter in this case? Yeah, but, you know, I'd like to turn now from these doubts and frustrations in order to share with you, or perhaps consult with you, a couple of reflections which I'd like to include in the preface to the Polish translation, yeah, because my conviction is that translation of Jerusalem, probably the whole of Blake, yeah, but of Jerusalem in particular, should be properly prefaced and published as a critical edition. Yeah, and these reflections address in particular the question why Blake gave his work such a decidedly British texture. Why is this golden string? Why does it have such a British gloss, this golden string, okay? And you know, since I've reached this turn, I'll perhaps turn off the presentation at this point just to see you better, okay? I'll not need it. Yes, I hope that everything is now just coming back to normal, okay? All right, so let us consider, of course, Jerusalem is a development. It is a retelling. If the theme of the fall, the passage, and the awakening woke Blake night after night when he was writing Jerusalem, it likewise woke him night after night when he was working on his earlier prophecies, yeah, including the four Zoas, which you remember is divided into nights. Yeah, and the question is, why did the author of the universal myth in the four Zoas, yeah, the patently international, transcontinental author of America prophecy, Europe, and Africa and Asia, yeah, in the Song of Laws, why did he develop his myth in such a way that its ultimate form, as given in Jerusalem, must be read with the map of Britain as a backdrop? And my first claim, perhaps paradoxical, maybe risky, but it is that by seemingly narrowing his myth, making it meticulously faithful to the local detail, Blake in fact managed to expand it because saturating Jerusalem with British minute particulars enables him to offer a much more complex, I'd say again, consolidated formula of men and a more profound diagnosis of the factors behind the fall and the conditions of awakening. And to give you a couple of examples, the universal men, eternal men, fallen men of the four Zoas is only sometimes in late editions called Albion, but that universal fallen eternal man becomes in Jerusalem consistently Albion, and he's tightly bound with the sons of Albion. The characters who you remember do not appear in the Lambeth prophecies or in the four Zoas. And this relation allows Blake to conduct, for instance, an intricate analysis of social processes, how the culture of a nation, Albion, England, gets corrupted through the corruption of individuals, the sons of Albion, and the other way around. So how the fall of a culture, Albion, corrupts his sons. Another illustration, Loss summons the cathedral cities as support in his fight for Albion. Of course, because a country's religious, spiritual, intellectual capital, heritage is an important asset in times of trouble. But in plate 42, we hear that the cathedral cities have been seized by Hand and Heil, because certainly countries' cultural capital participates in the fall. The present impacts the past. Stricken by Albion's disease, they become what they behold. So that famous and repeated quote from Jerusalem. Yet another last example. We are given in Jerusalem the returning vision of how those sons of Albion roll apart over the nations and roots. I'm quoting plate 15, en route into every nation, a mighty polypus growing from Albion over the whole earth. So you see the corruption, disease spreading from one country to the rest of the world. And of course, history has provided thousands of illustrations of this process. And the image is, of course, just as valid in our times. So think about Brexit. In Polish public debate, we have got an equivalent, this Polexit. Or think about the pandemic, the infection spreading from one nation over the whole earth. Powerful. All right, so in effect, due to its specifically English, British character and characters, Jerusalem is still able to narrate Blake's universal myth of the fall, the passage, and the awakening, but it simultaneously conducts an incomparably more complex, acute, I'd say subtle, multi-layered analysis of social and cultural processes. So as I said, by seemingly narrowing the application of his myth, Blake expands it, allowing it to operate on more levels and in more dimensions, illustrating in this way the point Loss makes towards the end of Jerusalem, that general forms have their vitality in particulars. Men participate in culture through its concrete manifestations. Probably cannot write a universal myth, ignoring such a basic universal. And my other claim, very briefly, I know time is running, but I would like just to mention it because it's beautifully relevant to the topic of today's meeting. So this other claim is that thanks to its British minute particulars, Jerusalem can be treated as a translation. If the theme of the fall, the passage, and the awakening is a retelling of Blake's own myth, it is, of course, likewise a retelling of the biblical narrative. and those intricate correspondences that Blake creates between the biblical and the British, places, characters, like for instance, the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 sons of Albion. All these analogies, parallelisms, look like an attempt to translate the Bible, of course, not into the English language. Yeah, this had been done long before Blake, but into the native experience of time and space, British history, culture, politics, foreign affairs, all right, human and social landscape, and the British map. So Blake, as if, I'm using a technical term from translation studies, he as if domesticates the Bible. Yeah, you remember he said the Old and New Testament are the great code of art, and he as if decodes the biblical narrative and encodes it with the use of all those local vernacular details, implying in this way that the biblical history of the fall, the passage, and the awakening is constantly relived in the experience of other tribes. He inscribes the gates of Revelation in the counties of Britain, showing in this way that the gates of heavenly Jerusalem are right here, fixed all around you. Eternity dwells in the reality one recognizes as his or her own, which of course in the case of Blake and his countrymen means the counties of England and Wales and Ireland and those 36 counties of Scotland. Now I learned from Wikipedia it's 32 counties. And of course, both Camila and myself are working on the translation of English Jerusalem into our languages. But I must tell you, and I shared this thoughts yesterday with Camila. She agrees, that the engagement with this poem in the capacity of a translator rouses the faculties to act, exactly as Blake hoped his art would do, by suggesting that perhaps Jerusalem, the emanation of the giant Albion, should be viewed as a model for application. Perhaps after translating it, the next step should be an attempt to domesticate Jerusalem, or as Camila's word yesterday was, transcreate Jerusalem by converting its British minute particulars into other nations' minute particulars, weaving their past and present into a string, and inscribing the gates of Jerusalem in, for example, the map of Brazil or the map of Poland. But anyhow, this is perhaps a great task for the future. At present, we are both working on a different great task, that is translation. And Camila will now tell you about her experience as a translator of Jerusalem into Portuguese and about further encouragements and challenges. Okay, so thank you, Camila. The floor is yours.
Hello, 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 hello. Hi. Thank you so much, Elisa. You're such a pretty thing. Thank you so much for everything. Hi, everybody. It's an honor, a tremendous responsibility to share this talk today with Elisa, this genius. Thank you very much for this inspiring and insightful presentation. How much I was moved by your words. We were talking about, what you just presented to a larger audience, but I had the privilege of hearing this. And I was very moved by everything you said. This sort of change of places. This domestication, but not in a negative sense, but a domestication that we can use our minute particulars and our geography to insert Jerusalem in that reality. I think it could make a beautiful translation. So I would like to thank you, Elisa, for this opportunity, Tim, and all the Blake Society for this invitation. It means a lot to me, and I must start by saying I really find many of you to be extremely fortunate for sharing the same mother tongue with William Blake, as I am more than fortunate for sharing the same mother tongue with the Brazilian writer Guimarães Rosa. and Elisa with her favorite Polish poet, Miłosz, because I think it's a huge privilege to establish an immediate linguistic connection with a man or woman of genius who transforms familiar sounds and words into a sublime work of art. Because I think each language has its own minute particulars. And I think the main challenge of the translator is transmuting the writer's minute particulars into another language. And to do this, it's necessary to translate not only what's written, but also what is not written, only suggested. And I don't know about you, but I often wonder how somebody's voice would sound in my language, you know, how their peculiar way of saying things would be like if they spoke my language. So this is what translating poetry is to me. You know, it's like trying to recreate the poet's voice. And when I think of Blake's voice, especially in his prophecies, I hear multitudes. I hear the voices of the prophets of the Old Testament, like Job, like Ezekiel, like Isaiah, like Moses. I hear the voice of the bard from the songs of experience, who past, present, and future sees. I hear the voice of a radical. I hear the voice of a man who creates his own system because he refuses to be enslaved by another man's. And the new system he creates also involves a neo-linguistic system which subverts these conventional semantics and syntax of his own mother tongue. So what he does, I think, it's creating his own language within the English language. So because of this, the experience of translating Jerusalem to any language is necessarily considered, you know, a tremendously ambitious and demanding project. And only recently it has become the subject matter of my thesis. I must say this because it was an accident. The former subject of a matter of my PhD, as Sibylla said, before being absorbed by, you know, Jerusalem, was the reception of William Blake in popular music, and a big hi to Carrie Davies, my muse. And this theme is still, you know, very dear to me. And they gave me the opportunity of interviewing some fantastic musicians and composers who set Blake to music, like Ed Sanders, Gordon Giltrap, and Tim Blake. And I remember that in 2018, I was watching on the internet the unveiling of Blake's gravestone. And all of a sudden, Bruce Dickinson, you know, the rock star you all know, stepped in with a very passionate testimonial. And of course, I could relate. And I immediately thought, you know, this guy could be a great person to talk to. So what I did, I contacted him because we happen to have a friend in common. So in 2019, I traveled to London for the interview. And I remember it took me weeks to prepare an extensive and detailed questionnaire about his Blake-inspired settings. But believe it or not, I forgot to take the questionnaire to the interview. And I tried my best to mask my despair, and I'm still not so sure whether he noticed or not. But this very unfortunate lapse is precisely what brings me here today, because without the questionnaire, I felt paralyzed, and I remember the only thing I managed to ask him while I tried to remember the other questions was, why Blake? And, you know, just to answer this question, he took like more than an hour to say, just to answer why Blake. And he talked about Blake's system. And I remember that he quoted many lines of Jerusalem by heart. And it was very clear to me that he knew an awful lot, you know, much more than I did. And he made the most difficult epic in the world sound like quite simple and obvious, and tremendously poetic and musical at the same time. And because of this, I decided to give Jerusalem a second go, because I remember that my first attempt to read it had been like a complete fiasco. My first impression was that the text was opaque, you know, using Blake's wording, it pretty much incoherent. But then I thought that if this time I translated instead of just reading, it would force me to read the same line like 100 times to figure out what he meant. So basically this, this is the background story of my translation. And it started off as an unpretentious exercise of interpretation and triggered by an interview that could have been a total disaster. But now, I got invited to talk about this. So, the accident and the translation of Jerusalem became an obsession because I started to identify some biblical references. I know that many Blake scholars have written extensively about the topic, but I didn't know much about those specific intersections. And the Bible was the only book I had at home when I was a child. So the Bible was like a fairy tales book, really, to me. It was, much just like maybe a much darker version of the Grimm brothers, so to speak. So this relative intimacy with the sacred text helped me immensely with the translation, because the reading was permeated by the constant feeling of of déjà vu, like the strange sort of familiarity. And I do believe that by writing Milton and Jerusalem in particular, Blake was really writing a revolutionary Bible. And to make sure that the Portuguese-speaking audience would be able to identify those, crucial biblical references, I decided to sit with the King James Bible and with the first translation of the Bible to Portuguese, because they both date from the 17th century, and they both, direct translations from the original text, the Masoretic text in the Old Testament, like Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, and some Latin, like in the New Testament. So we do have a translation. We do have a translation of King James Bible to Portuguese, but I don't really think that translation would work. It wouldn't be the best choice. So I decided to use, the same a translation which dates from the same time as King James Bible. So this Bible obsession so far has been responsible for some 200 footnotes stressing allusions and borrowings from the Bible. And hopefully there's more to come, because I'm still working on it. It's a work in progress. I haven't finished. But, unfortunately today we don't have the time to discuss all of them in detail. So I will give you some examples to illustrate how I transposed those references to the text. And after that, I'm going to talk about how the illustrations help me with the translation, right? So I'm just going to share screen now. Can you see that? Yes? So just a second. Okay, so on this first slide, we have what I call like ipsis litteris reference, or word for word reference, and it means that Blake quoted a fragment exactly as we find in the Bible. Here is one example of it in Isaiah chapter 60, verse 8. Who are these that fly as a cloud, as the doves to the windows? And in Jerusalem, played 44 lines 11 and 12, we have, and the divine hand was upon them through darkness, back safe to their humanity as doves to the windows. So you see, this as doves to the windows is the ipsis litteris reference, or word for word reference. I translated this fragment into Portuguese, como pombas as suas janelas, just like in the Bible, in the old Bible. So you see, quem são estes que vêm voando como nuvens e como pombas as suas janelas, is the Bible, and Jerusalem. E a mão divina pôs-se sobre eles, levando-lhes em segurança pelas sombras de volta para a sua humanidade, como pombas as suas janelas. So this is what I call ipsis litteris. And here now in the second slide, on the second slide, the reference is clear, but Blake makes a very small change in a fragment taken from the book of Job, chapter 4, verse 18. So in the Bible, it reads, and his angels he charged with folly, and whereas in Jerusalem we find and he chargeth his angels with folly. So I try to preserve the same inversion in Portuguese. We have, e aos seus anjos atribui loucura, and in the Bible, and in the translation, e que atribui seus anjos a seus anjos loucura. And here we have on the third slide, we see an example of a biblical phrase that Blake uses in Jerusalem, abomination of desolation. It is found in Matthew chapter 24, verse 15. In Jerusalem, we have the female hid within a male. Thus, Rahab is revealed. Mystery, Babylon the Great, the abomination of desolation. And in this translation, we have a mulher escondida no homem. Assim se revela Raabe, mistério, a grande Babilônia, a abominação da desolação, just like in the Bible. And there are many other biblical phrases like these, throughout Jerusalem. We have, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Jerusalem, but we find confusion of face, we find sackcloth of hair, furnace of affliction. There are many images of Jerusalem, by the way, the loom, these sort of allegories with the loom and the furnace. And we find all those allegories in the Bible too. So furnace of affliction comes from the Bible. The angel of my presence, mother of harlots, covering cherub, which is Satan, valley of vision, potter's field, cities of nation, just to name a few. And on the next slide, we have what I call biblical correspondence, because the example is the translation of the word happy. The most common translation of happy in Portuguese is feliz or maybe contente, but in the Bible, out of 25 entries of happy, only 5 are translated as feliz. The other 20 entries are translated in the Bible as bem-aventurado. And in Portuguese, bem-aventurado takes us straight into the biblical discourse, because it's a word intrinsically associated with the biblical vocabulary in Portuguese. And it means that apart from a very specific context, nobody translates happy as bem-aventurado. So my choice of using bem-aventurado to translate happy is to reinforce the parallel with the Bible and to enhance the prophetic atmosphere created by Blake. And in the next slides, as I said, illustrate how images play a crucial role in the interpretation of the text and helps the the translator to understand the complex allegoric descriptions. In a way, Blake images function as a kind of translator of the narrative. So to a certain extent, Blake is a self-translated author. If you think the illustrations, the image, as translating what he wrote. So on this slide here, let me see, yeah. So on this slide here, you find the starry wheels, right? It's a small illustration which goes almost unnoticed on page 20 of Jerusalem, in which you see the starry wheels revolving heavily over the furnaces, and it draws Jerusalem in anguish of maternal love. So, here the images, Jerusalem is drawn in anguish, both literally and symbolically. And I had to combine those two, the literal act of drawing and the symbolic act of drawing into Portuguese. So my translation is: E as rodas estreladas giravam pesadas sobre as fornalhas, arrastando Jerusalém em sua angústia maternal. And in the original is the starry wheels revolved heavily over the furnace, drawing Jerusalem in anguish of maternal love. So another example of, is the description of how the unified form of the 12 sons of Albion look like and how the process of division looks like. And the funny thing is that the lines which describe this process are on plate 70, whereas the image which depicts what happens is on plate 50. I'm going to show you now. It's not here. it's, oh my goodness, where is it? Oh, it's, here it is. So, so can you see that, you know, this is the plate 50, and the description of this division is on plate 70. So you need to be very careful, because it's quite common in Blake's prophetic book that the image on the plate does not necessarily correspond to what's written on the same plate. And after matching that description with the image, the translation just flowed much more easily to me as soon as I could see how he depicted this, you know, this division. And the English, the original is such form the aggregate of the 12 sons of Albion took, and such their appearance when combined. But often by birth pangs and loud groans, they divide to 12. The key bones and the chest dividing pain disclose a hideous orifice, thence issuing the giant brood. And I can see the rest because, you know, the sharing is just over that. And in the Portuguese is tal era a egrégora dos 12 filhos de Albião, e tal seu feitio quando reunidos. Porém, a miúde, com contrações e ganidos, dividem-se em 12. Clavículas e tórax se fendem em dores, revelando um orifício medonho, de onde sai a raça gigante, surgindo como a fumaça da fornalha, sacudindo as pedras dos mares. So this is how my translation. So this is my translation. And in the next slides, you see how the fibers play different roles in Blake. He uses the words polysemic potential and plays with the literal and symbolic all the time. In Portuguese, I translated fiber by fibra, and their semantic possibilities are pretty much similar. In Blake, fiber can be a thread or wool, just like here, right? It can be a thread or wool that feed the looms, and fibers also work like roots. In Blake, those human forms have many fibers which allow them to enroot, like hand and hile here, right? Or like here on the next slide, to connect to another man, just like in the beginning, as we see, the beginning of Jerusalem. Fibers of love from man to man through Albion's pleasant land. And I understand that the fiber, as ducts or veins of energy and affection. And my interpretation is that Blake depicts some of the uses and misuses of those fibers in different contexts. At times, as they connect at times they connect a man to another. They also feed the looms. They feed the dark satanic muse of the Industrial Revolution. So it's very difficult to find a perfect equivalence in any other language for Blake, because he not only makes the most out of the possibilities and nuance of a word, but he also adds new meanings and possibilities. He creates new metaphors, new allegories. There are many other tricky Blakean terms that would be wonderful to talk about, like vegetator, mundane shell, mundane egg, non-entity, selfhood, minute particulars, which is my personal favorite, and I think everybody's favorite too. And I wish I had enough time to discuss them, but the last thing I would like to say, and I finish here, is that today it's particularly important to consolidate the idea of a global Blake, as the mundane shell is cracking with xenophobia and all sorts of prejudices and hatred, and leaders like Trump and our president Bolsonaro, who makes the world a worse place to live. In Jerusalem, Blake said, "O Albion, let Jerusalem overspread all nations as in the times of old." Poland and Brazil, remember, they are included in the 32 nations which wait for Jerusalem, is there on the plate. And I think our plan must be to englobe all the nations. And we all know that translation plays a pivotal role in the dissemination of any text. And I think that an artist like Blake, an artist who contains the universe in his minute particulars, an artist who sees the world in a grain of sand, an artist who contains multitudes, he deserves that. So I think for today, it's enough or too much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, there's an opportunity for questions. So does anybody want to ask a question? I think there's a raise your hand function somewhere. I haven't discovered it yet, but and then Elisa and Camilla can answer.
Mute. I can see Jason raising his hand. He knows how to do it. Here's a...
I'm just
I'm wondering how you do it. Where we saw the hands raised.
It's under reaction. Although I'm going to pass to my wife, Sam, who it's actually she who wants to ask the question. So I'm just going to pass over, Sam.
Okay. I want to ask if you find that when you're translating, do you have to put the passion of Blake into your translation? So the passion of your language compared to Blake's language?
Yeah, I'll be very happy to answer this. Can I, Camilla? Yeah, I hoped very much to find an opportunity to say a little bit about that passion, right? The enthusiasm I claimed at the very beginning. I must tell you the following thing, that, a lot of passion from Blake comes very, very much from the rhythm and some intensity of what he's doing. I would willingly share the screen just to show you a few passages, but I will not, because perhaps there will be more questions. But, that passion is very often, expressed through passion rhythm, passion repetitions, right? So things like that. Yeah, just a few quotations. Let me show you, right? There is the cave, the rock, the tree, the lake, all right? Or you have got the land of snares and trucks and wheels and pitfalls. He sees the vision, and there is this passion in the way he communicates it through this rhythm. It's so strong. And, Polish doesn't have it. And this passion for me is very much expressed through this power of rhythm. We have been, I'm using this plural form when talking about this translation, concrete translation, because I have got a co-author, co-translator. Rafał couldn't be here with us today, but he's very, very much, 50% translator of this text, and we have worked out, for example, a method of finding a Polish equivalent for exactly, the way in which this text sounds so mesmerizing in a number of ways, and, as if written in trance, as if written in dictation, and very unobvious decision, and yet on the other hand, it works. I'll read a couple of passages and explain, what are those equivalents in terms of this Polish translation. So. We found, the way of translating Blake's strong rhythm through a much stronger emphasis upon assonance, for example. There are many more assonant clusters or even rhymes, internal rhymes, a lot of that. And, when you listen to it, the way it works, let me just quote a passage or another. Wąskie morze między kontynentem atlantyckim a Albionem i jego perłowe fale stały się nieogarnionym. Even, assonance between Albionem, nieogarnionym, bezdennym oceanem szarego mroku, wypełnionym chmurami, skałami, wodami. Yeah, there is a lot of alliteration sometimes, and there is this assonance, and, it creates this impression of as if you were seeing, and, as if those words were composing themselves into something which is, I cannot really compare this type of language, idiom, voice to any Polish poet. It developed itself from an attempt to find something like an equivalent to what we cannot render in Polish at all. And, where for me, you know, a lot of the passion of this original rests, right? Exactly, and you know how intensely it works, attacks your ears. Yes, so. Yeah, I'm happy I could say this. I wanted very much. Okay. Camila, how about you?
Thank you very much.
I think it's essential to use passion to translate Blake. I think there's no other way of translating Blake without passion. I think technique is secondary, really. I think you need Blake needs has to talk to you, to communicate to you with you somehow. I don't see any other way of how, you know, of how could anyone take the task of translating Jerusalem without this passion. For me, it's mandatory. It's a requirement to translate Jerusalem, and I think that of course I also think it's mandatory because I think that Blake talks so much about the minute particulars that I think that when you translate him, you need to use your minute particulars, the minute particulars of your language, and turns it into Blake's voice. I think he would appreciate it pretty much because he is an artist of multitudes. He's an artist of pluralism. So we all know how English he is, but at the same time he's as universal as English. So he's of that at once, and that's what I think.
Yeah, but I have a feeling also that, you know, this technique of Blake makes him so passionate, really, right? Partly it is through his technique, you know, the way he, and also, you know, another thing is, you know, this kind of passion, but also this impression that things are very carefully studied. You know, in our case,
every word in its place.
Yeah, precisely. And, you know, once you really start noticing through what technique he achieves this effect of passion, it is really extremely, on the one hand, right, you get the impression, on the other hand, there is this kind of feeling that, yes, he studies it very carefully. So to achieve the effect of passion when you are studying those letters so carefully, you know, those fantastic alliterations, I think that, you know, once you cannot render them into your own language, you perhaps become all the more sensitive to how strong he is and how very, very careful about such minute particulars of exactly, you know, technique, sound.
And you can see, and you can perceive this sort of urgency of communicate. Can't you? You know, this sort of, he's almost hysterical, you know. He wants so badly to communicate that sometimes he sounds hysterical. I think this, you know, this is what I call enthusiasm. I think he's, you know, you can feel this in enthusiasm as you read him, you know, and the cities, you know, the way he writes, you know, the name of the cities, you see, you can feel that urgency.
Okay. Jason, I hope your wise question has been answered. Louisa, you have got a question. It's lovely to see you. It's very good to see you.
Thank you so much for your answers. That was wonderful.
Thank you. What a joy to hear you discuss how to turn Blake into other European languages, and as you say, very much needed. I was very curious about the point you made, Elisa, and I also have a digressive side to my question, which is about the reception in fragments. And that, which is very important in the Italian reception of Blake as well, where seeing Jerusalem through tiny fragments translated by a great poet was extraordinarily productive in generating other works. So I'm curious because I've decided to read something with my students, which is this, Olga Tokarczuk's drive your plow over the bones of the dead. And of course
Prowadź swój pług przez kości umarłych. That's the original, all right?
There you go. So obviously, when you read this in English, all the epigraphs from Blake's Proverbs of Hell, from Auguries of Innocence, are rendered through Blake's original, whereas obviously if you're reading it in the original Polish, no, presumably you're reading them in translation. And I think that is such an interesting example of how a fragment can generate a different work, in this case, an eco-thriller. I don't know if you have comments about other ways in which the reception in fragment fertilizes other creative processes.
Okay, I have got some like a personal comment, perhaps, on fragments. Part of our translation, okay, has been, published years ago, but, not very long ago, what I had was a contract from a translator of a book I have covered. Nazywam się Steven Florida. Steven Florida from Gabe Habash, all right? And what he wanted, the translator Jędrzej Polak, what he wanted was a passage from plate 14 about schools, universities of Europe, okay? So you had that. Luckily, because together with Rafa, we have not yet finished our translation. We are like plate 58. Hope will now speed up, but it has been a work in progress for a long, long time. But, I consider what we have done as done and basically finished. Yeah, but anyhow, we were asked for a fragment which luckily came from a passage, right? By the way, this translator learned about Jerusalem, our translation from Blake Illustrated Quarterly, from that essay. So fantastic that it was published. And, he wanted this particular passage. We gave him, it turned out that, a fragment taken from the whole works. I was amazed, I thought that, you need to have, to get used to this voice, this tone, those effects, sound effects, right? And yet, he wanted just 7 lines. They work perfectly. And, now we have got this passage in translation and in a book, in a novel, right? Translated by somebody else. So that was perfect. And on the other hand, what happens, right? It is like relating back to what you asked about, Rita, that translator sent me a piece of a play, which was based on this novel. Not a play, it was like a theatrical reading of this novel of chapters. Hey, and they chose exactly the chapter with our translator. So we had it on stage, read to the audiences, which was fantastic. So in this way, this fragmentation, yeah. But other than that, my impression is, I have a very settled opinion on fragmentation of Jerusalem. Other works perhaps easier, and yet with Jerusalem, it is like if you really want to believe Blake that he's giving you any kind of golden string, you need to give the whole of it. A funny episode, a funny thing about the largest selection so far of fragments from Jerusalem in the Polish language. Plate 77, that passage about the golden string, which I showed you, the translator doesn't say, I give you. He translates this plate, but he doesn't say, I give you. But he says, dam ci, which means I will give you. He didn't dare to say that he's giving anything, yeah, while offering just, 25% of the text, okay? And, my impression is also that, in the case of Jerusalem, it's really very coherent. It is really consolidated. Yeah, I really like this word. I think Blake really knew what he was claiming in the first paragraph. Yeah, and once you fragment it, you just lose all that coherence, right? You must really eliminate so much because those things, stop basically communicating anything or meaning anything. If you mention those daughters of Albion once, okay, we love them because they reappear in other prophetic books, but once you just limit yourself to that list given once in the four Zoas, it's completely meaningless. This is
They
my
do
impression.
work as aphorisms. I mean, that's amazing to see how if you can abstract your knowledge of the poem and you encounter the little extract, it does work. It's maybe a different work, which maybe is also why it unleashes all sorts of creative practices in other artists. But I think it does work. Not everything, obviously, but
but Louisa, I have a feeling you said something absolutely cardinal and capital here. Namely, if you have the knowledge of the whole work, and my impression is, give people one full translation of every text, and leave the space for everybody to start practicing with fragments, translating them. Looking for a new voice. But, once you have a whole as something which will be a kind of backdrop against which every new translation will be measured, it's completely different than when you have got just certain fragments. This is my impression, right? This is my impression. I must tell you that, I was once invited by students to a meeting about satanic plague. It was all full of candles, black, very very, dark. And, they were working on fragments. They thought he was a satanic kind of, follower or whatever, right? So complete misunderstanding also comes out of reading fragments. Okay, so this is my perception, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Camilla, how about you and fragments?
There is a very accomplished Blake scholar in Brazil, Juliana Style, and she's been collecting all the translations in Portuguese from Portugal and Brazil, and most of the translations of Jerusalem are fragments. We have at least three books. I think I've got a slide here. I would like to share very briefly just to show you the cover. And Juliana Style collected those, those books. So here we have can you see this? Yeah.
Yes.
So this is the fragments of Paulo Visioli, a genius. He won a national award for this translation, and there is a fragment of Jerusalem there, and Elio Osvaldo from Portugal. But the other three, the first three, are from Brazil. So we have a full text. So I'm not the first translator of Jerusalem. So the first is by Saulo Alencastre. It dates from 2010, and all the rest are fragments only. So we here in Brazil, we also have this this tradition of fragmentation of his epics, which is a shame. But fortunately, I've got something else to show you just briefly. This is the latest translation of Blake. So Visões de William Blake, Visions of William Blake, and you have most of his prophecies, but the shorter one. So Milton and Jerusalem were left out, but it's it's a quite beautiful edition and a thick book. So you see here you find Songs of Innocence, Experience, and the Marriage of Heaven and Hell, the Book of Thel, and Song of Laws, and a couple of others. So the latest release, it's like free. I'm doing this for free, so a beautiful book. I'm looking forward to read it as soon as I finish my thesis by José Antonio Arantes, the translator. It's very important, and Patty Smith does this, and I think it's very important. Not only name the author but the translator. We should be recognized as artists as well. So José Antonio Arantes, the translator of this piece.
You know that Ungaretti chose exactly the same title for the seminal Italian translation of Blake, Visions.
Oh, good. Yeah. It's quite appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Ramazan has a question.
Thank you again. As I told you before, after your speech, after you told me that you translated Jerusalem, I checked and I found out there's no Turkish translation, so I am translating as well, but it is taking quite some time. I could only come up to plate 8 so far. because it takes too much time. You need to translate all of them and add footnotes, try to add glossary. So what do you do? What is your strategy when you come up with a problem, when you come up with a block or slump? Because I come up against these slumps or blocks too often. And if it's okay, I would like to email you from time to time, because it is very difficult to translate Jerusalem, I found out.
Yeah, you're very welcome to email. You know, my method is to cooperate. Yeah, cooperate. Yeah, one method is, of course, to go on reading, about Jerusalem. It is like, you know, you discover very easily that there are exactly a number of places which are so very difficult to translate and which, you know, have never been, you know, have never found anything like a explanation or footnote in those most commonly used, most popular editions, for example, right? So, you know, you discover very much that, hey, for a translator, every line is important. It's important, for example, I know when you translate into Polish, you must decide, for example, when you have got a group mentioned, you must decide whether, for example, pronouns are referring to males or males and females. This is a grammatical necessity, you must. And you know, you read, and there are so many situations where you have got this they in English, which may refer to either female group or both, or just male, you know, a number of situations. And you go on studying, you know, different footnotes, glosses, critics writing. And, you know, there are so many situations that you just do not find anybody making any comment on it, because all these books are taken from the English tradition. Yeah, they are Anglophone, which means that, you know, the critic doesn't need to decide. If the critic doesn't need to comment on it, or, you know, but criticism, when you read criticism, it basically follows the critic's argument. The critic talks about those things which are important for his her discussion of a particular aspect, right? Whereas as a translator, you are just, you must understand every word. Yeah, and so a method is no hurry for me, and you know the other method is cooperate. Yeah, so I have got a co-translator. I'm very happy about it. He's wiser than me. Yeah, yeah, so lovely. It's simply lovely to have at least, you know, shared responsibility about certain decisions. But you know, also I am thinking, as I said, you know, during this presentation, my plan is to have Jerusalem really published as a critical edition. All those places where the thing cannot be decided, where I'm taking responsibility, I'm going just to communicate this kind of ambiguity of the original through footnotes. Yeah, not obtrusive, just at the end, without those numbers saying which footnotes, so that, you know, it doesn't look horrible. And yet, yes, I'm going to have as many footnotes as that are necessary in order to explain all moments of doubt, all moments where the decision had to be taken by translators. Okay, in consultation, but consultation, you know, with books may mean that, you know, two critics say one thing, the other two critics say something else. Yeah, like Morton Priley says something and somebody else says something different, right, about a particular line. Who do I listen? Morton, of course, and yet, you know, I want a footnote to say that there are others who suggest something different, okay? Yeah, so yeah, so these are my methods. How about Camila?
Well, plenty of footnotes. Just the Bible, I have like around 200 footnotes. For me, it's extremely necessary, but as you said, I don't want to corrupt aesthetically the text, so I don't want to put them on the same page, but it would be tremendously necessary to use some footnotes, especially because of the ambiguities and everything. So, and those, you know, linguistic specificities like gender and things like this, because in Portuguese adjectives are, you know, you have gender particle, and in English you don't. So sometimes you don't know exactly whether, you know, Blake's talking about all, you know, sons and daughters of Albion. Sometimes it's not, you know, they, for example, sometimes it's not easy to, you know, to find who Balak's referring to. So I think we need to make clear those ambiguities and make sure that we had made a choice, you know, a personal choice.
Yeah, and the point is that, you know, in the original, this is beautiful that it's so ambiguous. It's fine. It's the capital of the original, right? It can speak double language, right? You can do with it what you want. But as a translator, having those grammatical limitations, you simply must decide, because you cannot produce a grammatical sentence without this decision. Yeah. So yeah.
Yes, and I think of Bonify, for example. You know, this strange thing, Bonify, that you find in Milton and Jerusalem. You know, like make good. You know, become good, and then also like ossify, like become like a bone. So how can I translate this ambiguity to Portuguese? It's impossible. It requires a footnote. Bonify, it's a delightfully bizarre thing of Blake's, you know, vocabulary, and I love it, but it requires a footnote. We have to choose. Like cove, for example. I remember cove, you know, like the Celtic cove, you know, this formation, this stone. We don't have a translation for cove, and I had to use like an old English dictionary to that etymologically justifies my choice for cova. But cova in Portuguese, it's like grave, so it's very complicated because it's not. So you know, it requires it's a text which requires many footnotes. Absolutely.
I have many other questions, but I would like to email them to you if you like later on.
All right. Okay, thank you for this. It was very, very inspiring. Right, John Milton has got a question. John Milton, that will be about Milton.
My teacher, he was my teacher.
All right.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Right, I put the question in the chat.
All right.
I grew up reading Blake's poems, and I only got to know the illustrations much later. Now, many people would say that the poems must be read with illustrations. I noted both of you didn't make the mistake of just putting the text translation. Both of you kept the illustrations. But of course, we still see Blake's poems without the illustrations. Comments, please.
You know, I'll make a comment on it, the following one, right? I began talking about it and just dropped because that was too big for a beginning. But, you know, because we perhaps will have money for this edition in which you have got the full of Jerusalem, right, in the form of illuminated plate reproductions. And, you know, we thought about having some like a parallel edition, right? Obvious idea, it seems. But, you know, once you start having money for it, you understand, hey, it is horribly difficult to organize, to just envision, right, how this thing is going to work. Because, you know, because of the illuminations, the distribution of the text is completely uneven. You have got, you know, sometimes full plate text. On other plates, of course, you've got half of the plate image or more than that. Or you have got plates which do not have text at all. And if you imagine this kind of parallel edition, it is simply, you know, it is impossible to make it look good. Yeah, and, you know, I started thinking that probably the best idea would be the following, that we have got a number of plates, but a number of the original plates, but we place them you know, next to the Polish translation, but they will occur here and there, and only those which are the most telling, the most characteristic, you know, somehow representative of the way in which the image and the text stand together. All right, so perhaps this type of edition in which we have got selection of plates should be better than just the whole text, you know, parallel edition, which you do when you, you know, I can show something quite interesting. I've got it in here and I'm happy that I can show it. You know, we have got a parallel edition of Songs of Marriage of Heaven and Hell. And you know, what this one looks like, you know, it is trying to, oh my God, if I can see it. this is, let me see, this is the original, this is Polish. So what they did with Marriage of Heaven and Hell is just, reproduce the illuminations so that you can also have this uneven distribution of the text upon the pages. Okay, so this is an idea, Marriage of Heaven and Hell is much easier, right, in this respect. So that is it. But, other than that, I have a feeling that reflection upon the images. I loved what Camila said, that for her, the images were an important element for the way in which she understands the text, right? Whereas in our case, I'm not terribly visual, and, for the purposes of writing this critical commentary, I have engaged already a person who will be responsible exclusively for commentary upon the images. Okay, so we do the translation with Rafał, but there will be a person who will be just adding comments to plates which she finds most illuminating in this respect. Yeah? And we also thought that perhaps, this idea of selecting plates and then having commentary. Okay, so this is for me. And Camila, how about you? Your teacher wants to hear you.
Of course, I used the term. I used the wrong term. I said illustration. I should have said illumination.
That was perfectly understood.
Yes, I think Blake have many quotes has many quotes about his relation with painting, poetry, and music. There is only one I can remember by heart, which is poetry, painting, and music are the three powers of man in men of conversing with paradise, which the flood did not sweep away. And I think that he makes lots of references to those three powers of man. And being someone who studied Blake and music, and I can see Blake's musicality. Remember that the very last line of Jerusalem, it's end of the song of Jerusalem. It's amazing because in the end, he signals, he points out that it's a song. So so the three powers of man are in Jerusalem. You have poetry, painting, and music. So I think that you should look to Blake's work as a three-dimensional or threefold work. I don't know about the fourfold, the fourth element, to think of it as a fourfold, because I think that fourfold is Blake's I don't know, it's Blake's ideal, but I think that those three powers are in Blake everywhere, and I think the most you can take the most out of Blake's poetry if you have the images. I wouldn't say like don't do it, it's impossible. I would never say something like this. Blake hates like restrictive laws. He hates law, so I wouldn't say like never, but it gives you a much better idea of his universe, of his philosophy, if you like.
Yeah, that passion we talked about earlier, right? Yeah, part of this passionate look of the page comes from exactly the intensity of those images.
And I don't think they restrict, because some people can say like, oh, the images maybe would restrict interpretation because he is interpreting the text for you. But the text, the paintings, the illuminations are so complex that they also have multiple interpretations. It makes it even more complex, I would say. It doesn't simplify the text at all.
Yeah. Okay, Sibylla, you promised to follow the chat.
Yes, and there is a question, or it's two questions, and I think it's about how you explain Blake's personal mythology. So there's two questions that are very similar, and I'm trying to summarize them, and references to the Bible as well as British themes. And I'm assuming, this is me trying to connect to what you've said, some of those explanations have to go into footnotes or into the preface. How do you decide what to put where?
Okay, in this critical edition, yeah, because can I tell you, I have been working upon Jerusalem for some like 10 years, cooperating with Rafał Stankiewicz, who was the initiator of the whole idea. But what happened is that recently, so that's exactly what Sibylla was saying when introducing me, you know, we applied for a grant, not we two, but 7 of us. We have got one of the best Polish translators, and we have got also a couple of people who will be responsible for exactly this kind of commentary. And, you know, we came up with I think, fantastic vision of a huge project, huge grant with 4 volumes being published, 7 people involved, 4 translators, and the other people, including Sibylla, by the way, all right, being busy, right, doing all that commentary. And, you know, the vision, because we have got a 4-fold vision of Blake in Polish in 4 volumes, right? So the idea is very, very much that each of those volumes will have the preface, each of those volumes will have the editorial apparatus in the form of glosses, yeah? So, you know, first volume is mostly rhymed poetry, second volume is early prophecies, plus the 4 zoas is some like preparation for the 3rd volume, which is Jerusalem and Milton. And, you know, plan for the prefaces is in the 2nd volume, you talk about Blake's, the development of Blake's myth from the early prophecies, from exactly America, Europe, Africa, and Asia, right, through the 4 zoas, what is happening there, and later this very, very decidedly British turn in Milton and Jerusalem in volume 3. So, you know, we will have just plenty of opportunity to explain, on the one hand, exactly, you know, the things which... I will tell you something curious about another edition. Perhaps it is this edition which I told you includes the largest selection from Jerusalem. You know, when you look at the glosses, right, the part with exactly this commentary, you have got, you know, each and every character from Blake's mythology. You have got Urizen, and, you know, you have got all the Zoas, you've got their sons, their daughters, you have all that. Whereas, you know, when you look at this glossary carefully, you have got just something like Tyburn, London Stone, and you've got about 3 or 4 terms explained exclusively, you know, which on the one hand, you know, it definitely doesn't assume that, you know, people are familiar. It just tells you, you know, how much has been cut. There is no reason to explain all the other things because they do not appear in this edition among those glosses and in the translations themselves, right? So do not have to appear in the glossary. Yeah. So we want to have complete Blake, and wanting complete Blake, we want 4 volumes and have plenty of space for talking about particular element in a proper fit place. Oh, this is it, right? The fit place, right? So the fit preface. Yeah, so this is the idea, but my God, if we don't get this money, you know, I have no idea. Thank you. Yes, I hope this answers, right, Sibylla, right, you communicated. I see that Peter Dodd has raised his hand. It's lovely to see you.
Well, ladies, can you come every month, please?
Yes.
I would. We would.
And if I may, I just add one thing to your comments, and what a wonderful evening this has been for me. I'm going to go to bed with a smirk on my face. And you two, outstanding. Also, apart from the voice, the hearing, the eyesight, working with Blake's text, there is the touch. I have some of the editions of Blake's that I have the most exquisite paper, and I'm involved in a sensory experience of 4 of the senses. And if I could eat the books, I'd try that too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, lovely.
Everyone, a wonderful evening. It's time to bring tonight's meeting to an end. Our thanks to Elisa and to Camilla. And may I ask you both to end tonight with saying the final line of Jerusalem in your own language, the end of the song of Jerusalem in Polish and Portuguese.
Koniec pieśni Jeruzalem.
Fim da canção de Jerusalém.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank
It's been a
you.
pleasure. Very, very
Thank you, Elisa.
Fantastic.
Wonderful.
Bravo.
good.